All right, everybody. So we are here today. So purpose of this video is going to help everybody improve your catch rates, specifically targeting halibut in the San Francisco Bay. Over the course of this past season, I've had many days on the water, and they've been all wonderful. We've drifted for hours with nothing, and then get into a flurry of fish for say an hour and a half or 2 hours. And so just kind of looking at my charts and looking at what I do to kind of figure out when the best time the bite's going to be. I want to kind of share what I've learned over this period of time and hopefully help everybody out there who watches this improve your catch rates. Although I always recommend, hey, look, it's better than being at home. You're going to catch fish throughout any period of a tide, depending on where you fish. But there are those times in the tide where you're going to catch more fish. The bite's going to be hotter, and you kind of just have to know when that's going to happen and where to be when that's going to happen. So I'll share with you what I've learned, and hopefully that's going to be helpful for everybody in the future. So one of the main websites I like to use is Tides for Fishing. Again, it's got a lot of information on it, maybe sometimes too much information, but my favorite things that I use Tides for Fishing is the tide table and tidal coefficient. It does have the moon information on it, solar lunar activity. So those things can all be really helpful. It also has weather, wind, and swell reports. Although I do highly recommend going out in the ocean that you're going to use other apps and websites to confirm the weather conditions. I don't think that Tides for Fishing has it as accurate as I'd like it to with swell and the wind, but it's close. So it is definitely a piece of information for you to use. But I think they've nailed the tides and the best times to fish. And so what I want to do is go over what we do when we go out fishing and how we choose our days. So if you're like me, you're only going to have so many days available to fish a month, maybe once a week, less. So when you do go out, you want to make sure those are the right days and that you have the best opportunity to catch fish. So here's what we're going to do. I'm going to go over this website, how I use it, and the methods we use when we're targeting fish on a day and how we maximize our use of tides. So the first thing I want to do is show you this page right here. So this is from Monday, August 24th. This is going to be potentially a really good tide day for halibut. One thing that you want to look for when targeting halibut is water movement and the difference between the high tide and the low tide, or the low tide and the high tide. So what we have here is a high tide at 4:27 a.m. and you have a low tide at 9:52 a.m. right here. What's good about this is there's not a lot of water movement from the high tide to the low tide. So that's going to help with water clarity. It's also going to help with how fast you're going to drift, and that's really good for halibut. Once the water gets moving really quick and the water gets muddy, that can sometimes impact the halibut fishing. So I like to see this small change in high tide and low tide, or low tide and high tide. So this tells me here this is not a bad day. When I look at when to fish, obviously everybody will tell you it's like an hour before high tide or an hour after high tide, sometimes 2 hours. On a day like today, because there's not a lot of water movement from high to low, you can fish for a lot longer in this tide where the bite should be hot. So I like that. When that tide slacks here at 9:52, you just got to be careful. If you're not moving and you're not drifting at all, you can get a lot of stingrays, sharks, and different things like that. So I recommend a slow troll at that point, or bumping your boat through these time periods to keep your bait moving along the bottom. But once that incoming kicks in, I expect this time between 9:52 and 4:38, that first 2 hours after that low tide, to be a really good period of time to catch halibut. The next part of that tide that should be pretty good is right before that high tide at 4:38. So maybe an hour and a half before that should also be a good time to catch fish. And then if you're still in the water at that late in the day, that outgoing tide, that first hour and a half, 2 hours of that outgoing tide should be pretty good. The water on a day like today, if the wind isn't up, should have good clarity. So I like a day like today to target for going out there. What we usually like to do is fish, knowing that the tides are going to be, the high tide or low tide will happen sooner at the gate and later on in the day. As I kind of move this cursor, you'll see as I'm coming toward Treasure Island, and then I'm going down south here towards South San Francisco over here. And then you have your Alameda, Rockwall area over here. So when you're looking at tides, you know that you're going to get your lower high tide first here. and then it's going to slowly get to those either high or low points the farther south east you go throughout the bay. So what we like to do is we come in and we get our bait here, and if we feel like we have a good shot either at Alcatraz, if it's in here, Angel Island, or Chrissy Fields, we'll start there. It's a little bit closer, so we know we'll get to that key fishing time when you're a little bit closer to the Golden Gate Bridge. And then when you hit those high or low tide points, that hour and a half or so before or after that, if you're catching fish, yeah, you want to stay and hit that. You do know when that time stops or you're not getting any fish anymore or you never got fish there, we're going to go ahead and move east and maybe aim for the flats, Berkeley Flats area. There's the barges here near Treasure Island, and we'll try to hit those. Obviously, you look at your fishing report. Sometimes you'll be over here near Tiburon, Paradise. This depends on where the fish are, but we like to fish closer to the gate and move ourselves east and then eventually south. So what I like to do to maximize my day is if I can hit some fish here at Chrissy or Angel Island, and then I'll move my way up to Treasure Island as the tide kind of continues to get to a point where the fish are hitting, that's great. And then we'll move our way south. Depending on where the fish are, we might fish the rock wall or South San Francisco. And that way we can continue moving in the direction the tide is going so that we have the tide where we want it, where the fish are going to be biting. So that's one of our effective methods. Now, what are days that are more challenging for catching halibut? Let's take a look at that. So here, just looking at our tide and times tables on this particular day. So this is Tuesday, September 1st. I chose this day because it's almost a full moon on this day, or it is a full moon on this day. Typically, a full moon is going to increase your tidal coefficient, and that's going to mean a lot of water movement. So when I see that, I feel like that may not be the best day to go out for halibut. I'm not saying don't fish that day and that you're not going to catch fish. I'm just saying that in particular, that day could be a little bit more challenging. But if you look here compared to the other day that I showed you, there's a big difference in the fish or in the tide. And so that means a lot of water movement. Now I look down here and I believe in these. These say these are a great day to go fishing, and I think that's going to be accurate. It just depends on the species of fish that you're targeting. So for halibut, they tend to bite better with clean water and less water movement. But other fish like striped bass or salmon and other species that you're fishing for, freshwater bass and different things like that, may do better under these types of conditions. So just pointing out to you, in particular for halibut, that big gap in the tide could be an issue. So the outgoing in the afternoon, there's a less water change, so this might be the better time to fish for the halibut right here. But that early tide, that fast incoming, could be somewhat of an issue. With that said, you still have a window right here where the fish would be biting. But if you got on the water about 6 a.m., you may have a small bite here and then a long break right before high tide. Keeping in mind that with all that water movement, you could have some muddy water, so you're going to want to find clear water. Over here, you'll notice that the tidal coefficient is an 84 or 85. That's a high value. And what that means is that the currents and the tides will also be high, which means there's a lot of water moving that day. When there's a lot of water moving, it can impact the halibut bite, and it can also impact the water clarity. So just keep that in mind. And that's why sometimes those days are a little bit harder for halibut. What you can do, though, to minimize that current is fish in shallower water. Go on the flats. If the deeper you fish tends to have a faster current. So if you're fishing in 30 to 40 feet of water that day, the current's going to be real quick. So you may want to find something in the 12 to 20 foot range to kind of slow down that tidal current. Just keep that in mind as you're looking around for the fish that day. All right, so we've covered good days versus bad days, tidal coefficient high versus tidal coefficient low, and then you have the tide. So whenever we've gotten to the high, the full moon, it always seems to have been a more difficult day to catch fish. So just to recap, full moon usually equals a high tidal coefficient, which could be challenging for the halibut. You're also, when you're looking for a good day, you want those small changes between high and low and high if possible. So when that water's not moving too quick and the water's clean, those are going to be really good days to target your halibut. All right. Hopefully this video was helpful. If you liked this video, please go ahead and subscribe if you haven't already, and like this video. I really appreciate it. Thank you. Bye.